For those of you that have not had the chance to meet yet, I'm Linda O'Neill. I'm the Education Lead at Celsius, and it's lovely to see so many of our regular forum members signed up and on the call, but it's also lovely to see some new members today as well. So if this is your first meeting, we really hope that you enjoy it, and as I was just saying, looking forward to getting the chance to meet you face to face, hopefully in the not too distant future now. I'm really delighted today to be able to welcome along some of Education Scotland's attainment advisors to talk about the work that they're involved in and how this supports equity for care experienced children and young people. So I'm just going to pass over to the Education Scotland's team to say hello and introduce themselves before we go any further. So Eve, do you want to say hello?
Yeah, I will do. Good morning, everybody. It's lovely to be here. My name is Eve Moran, and I am one of the attainment advisors for Education Scotland. So lovely to meet you. Lorna?
Good morning, everyone. I'm also an attainment advisor, and I'm in a lovely position where I've actually worked with 2 local authorities, and you couldn't get more further apart. I worked with Scottish Borders for a couple of years, and I'm now attainment advisor in Highland.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Callum McFarlane, and I'm an attainment advisor for South Ayrshire, and I'm delighted to be here today as well.
Thank you very much, guys.
You're on mute, Linda.
Thank you. Always a pitfall, isn't it? But before we go into today's theme, I thought it would be helpful just to run through the agenda and cover off a wee bit of housekeeping. So we've got an input from Eve, Callum, Lorna and Jamie about the work that they're involved in and why this is such an important area of focus for our population of children and young people. We'll then have the opportunity to split into breakout rooms to discuss this in a wee bit more depth and discuss it with each other. And then we'll come back together to share some of the themes from our discussions, and we'll finish up about 11. I will do my very best to keep us to time. We will be recording the formal input part of the session, and we'll make the videos and any of the materials that we produce available on our website. We will only be recording the main session and not the breakout rooms. The chat function is open, and we'd really encourage you that if you've got any questions or reflections, please feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll pick these up as we go along. So we've invited some of Education Scotland's attainment advisors today to share the work they're involved in around the Scottish Attainment Challenge. I'm not going to spend any time really talking about the Attainment Challenge because that's what our Education Scotland colleagues will do, but I thought it might be helpful to set the context about why a focus on equity in education is so important for our care experienced children and young people. We know that across the majority of the indicators that we collect data on, children with care experience don't do as well at school as those who don't have experience of care. We do have some data on this, which tells us that the average school attendance in Scotland is 93% for all children, but for children who are looked after, that's 89.5%, and that drops lower still for children that are looked after at home or for those that are in kinship care. 37% of looked after children leave school with 1 or more qualification at SCQF level 5 or higher, but that's compared to 85% of all school leavers. We also know that looked after children on average leave school earlier than all other children. So whereas 12% of all school leavers compared to 42% of looked after children leave school at 16. We know that the exclusion rate for looked after children is much higher, sitting about 5 times that for all children, and that about 76% of looked after children were in a positive post-school destination 9 months after leaving school, and that's compared to 93% of all children. And that's just some of the stats that are available through the Educational Outcomes publication that the Scottish Government publish every year. But I do think it's really important when we're talking about any data or any stats that what we keep uppermost in our minds is that each of these numbers represent a child or a young person, and that they each have their own unique and individual story. The data is a snapshot in time and shouldn't be used as a predictive measure of how children with care experience will do now or in later years, but what it does tell us is that this group of children can face additional vulnerabilities. The data helps us understand how a child or young person might be experiencing school, if they're not attending as much, if they're getting excluded more, if they leave earlier, and if they have fewer post-16 options, then this can give us a bit of an insight into how they might be feeling about their experience in school. And that can also help us understand what the other less measured or non-measurable opportunities children might be missing out on. So things like building and sustaining friendships and relationships, access to extracurricular activities or access to community supports. So taking together this data and these insights to help us understand why ensuring equity for our care experienced children and young people around educational outcomes is so important. I think it's also worth flagging that the Promise has identified education as a really key part of the scaffolding of care, and it's recognised the importance of equity of access to educational opportunities, but also how crucial it is that the relationships that we build with children while they're in school are really meaningful and authentic. What the research tells us is that if people have a good experience while they're at school, they are much more likely to go back on to further and higher education later on in life. So that's why meaningful and sustaining relationships are really important to be building with children while they're at school. So it's through this lens that we're thinking about today's theme with the attainment advisors. And we're really looking forward to hearing more about the work and the ways that we can collaborate together and drive progress in this area to make sure that there's equity of access, not just to outcomes, but also to experiences for our children and young people. So without further ado, I will hand over to Eve, Lorna and Callum.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. So I'm going to start off. Could the slides, Michelle, could the slides come on the screen? I'm not seeing them. Excellent. So if you just click, the next one is just our names as a wee reminder. And then the next one is our aims for this morning's session. So the aim really, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide you with some information about the Scottish Attainment Challenge. Forgive me if I slip into the terminology that we use every day. We tend to call it SAC. We also talk about having AA meetings, which takes on a whole new meaning. So I'll try not to use acronyms this morning. We're going to talk about the role of the Attainment Advisor, but with a specific focus on care experienced children and young people. I'll then pass over to Eve, who will speak to you about some kind of key themes, insights and perspectives around care experienced children and young people and equity, related to equity. And she's got some attainment figures to show you to kind of back up some of the things that Linda's just said to us. And then, and probably the most exciting part, is Callum is going to talk about his role as attainment advisor and some examples of the local authority that he works with and some of the work that they've been doing. His slides have got photographs on them. I'm a bit jealous. So as Linda said, please put comments, queries, questions in the chat, and we'll address these before the end of our presentation and before we go into discussion. So the next slide, please. Just gives you some background to, there is SAC, the Scottish Attainment Challenge. So launched 6 years ago. Scottish Government are currently consulting with a range of stakeholders about what SAC 2 will look like after the publication of the 5-year reports about SAC. The aims are basically, I mean, the focus of an attainment advisor is a relentless focus on closing the poverty-related attainment gap. So it's about raising attainment as well as closing that gap. And in terms of educational outcomes, when we talk about equity, we do have, we're quite data rich in Scotland, and we can use a range of measures to look at that poverty-related attainment gap. The third bullet point there talks about equity being achieved by ensuring every child has the same opportunity to succeed And Michelle, if you could just click, a little visual is going to come up. You've probably seen this one. It's been going around for a few years, but I really, really like it because it shows the difference between equality and equity. So that the outcome here is for those 3 people to watch the sports game. I'm not sure what kind of game it is. Equality, they've all been given the same thing. They've all been given the same sized step to stand on to look over that barrier to see the game. The person on the left looks really quite comfortable with that support they've been given. But as for the other 2, they're certainly not getting an equity of access to that opportunity. Whereas on the right-hand side, they've been given the supports that they need. Children are unique and they will need different supports in order to help them to succeed. I think there's also a third little picture, I don't have it here today, where the fence has actually been removed, which is really, I suppose, societally what we want. We don't want any barriers to any of our children and young people. So the Scottish Attainment Challenge then focus on that improvement in educational outcomes related to literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing. And those are the core of Curriculum for Excellence, and indeed the responsibility of all teachers and practitioners in educational settings. And where does the money come from? It comes from Scottish Government in something called the Attainment Scotland Fund, and I'll come back to that in a later slide. So the next slide, please, just shows us a kind of breakdown of the Attainment Challenge programme. But before I talk about that, just want to say that as well as the focus on literacy, numeracy and health and wellbeing, there are key themes within the Attainment Challenge of leadership, learning, teaching and assessment, and working with families and communities. So just back to this slide, it's really just an overview to show you, to explain the kind of terminology. We often talk about challenge authorities, schools programme and universal support. So here we've put all 32 local authorities into the box. The challenge authorities are the ones where we have children living in the highest areas of deprivation, and those authorities get the most amount of money. It goes to the local authority to spend it, you know, under that aim of closing the poverty-related attainment gap, and kind of giving it to schools, using it for staffing, using it for partnership work or research as relevant to the individual context. The schools programme, of which there are 12, is a bit different. The schools programme has identified schools in the areas of highest deprivation, and those schools receive direct funding from Scottish Government to close the poverty-related attainment gap in their school. And it varies. I said in my introduction, I used to be attainment advisor in Scottish Borders. There are 2 schools programme schools. I'm now attainment advisor in Highland, where there are 9. So it just depends on local data. The universal authorities, they are the areas of least disadvantage in Scotland, which I'm sure you'll recognise from looking at them. And although they don't receive specific Scottish Attainment Challenge funding the way the other local authorities do, they get PEF funding and Care Experienced Children and Young People funding, which I'll come on to. But something that all authorities have in common is that they get access to, and I would say that they benefit from, the support of an attainment advisor. The next slide explains what the role of an attainment advisor is. And it can vary depending on the local authority and the context that you work with. So I'll just give you a moment to read through those bullets. So you can see there's a wide range of ways that we can support. We can, you know, it can be simply from introducing local authority colleagues to each other, about joining up existing projects. For example, here in Highland, the Care Experienced coordinator and the Attainment Challenge coordinator have been working with me to pull together some of their funding, and we're going to be working with NCR Pathways to do some mentoring. So it's about that kind of facilitating and supporting, giving advice, signposting, it really just depends on the context. And the beauty of the job is it's wide and it's varied. My last two slides this morning focus on the Care Experienced Children and Young People Fund. So it's part of this big, huge Attainment Scotland fund, which is part of the challenge. There's a hyperlink at the bottom that takes you to the operational guidance and just further information about that. But I've got a couple of slides with the kind of key points here. It's £1,200 per child, and it's allocated to the local authority. Local authorities work in partnership to create a plan and then a report on how they use this funding, which of course will vary from local authority depending on the number of eligible children and young people. And it's social work and education who work together to plan and to report. And our senior education officer colleague, Janine McCulloch, who I believe is on the call today, has an overview of the 32 plans and reports. And within them, that there's a range of different approaches, and we've chosen a couple this morning to share with you. My last slide, please, is just some significant points that I wanted to highlight from the operational guidance of that Care Experienced Children and Young People Fund. As it's part of the Attainment Challenge Fund, it's about improved educational outcomes. The term Care Experienced is used, as you well know, to be wider in scope than just looked after children. As I said before, administered by education and social work to enable that wider wellbeing and GIRFEC focus. And it must be additional. It's not to replace or replicate existing services. It should be additional. So there will be somebody in each local authority who manages this fund, and you can contact to get more information about it, or contact the attainment advisor and we can put you in touch with that person. So I'll now pass over to Eve, who's going to share some data with you and discuss Care Experienced Children, Young People and the issue of equity. Thanks, Eve.
Thank you, Lorna, and hello again, everybody. So in this section, I would like to just offer you a few insights that may be of interest or relevant for your work with care experienced children and young people. So to begin with, I'd just like to share some of the attainment data for looked after children. I know some of which was touched on this morning by Linda. This just adds a little bit extra to that. So this information that I'm going to share with you just now is available on the public domain on something called the National Improvement Framework Interactive Tool, which we sort of shortened to the NIF. It's referenced at the end of these slides, so you can go and have a look if you're interested. There's a lot of data on there. So the data is from the 2018 to 2019 academic year. So just to say, this is the latest national data available, as the Scottish Government didn't collect achievement of a level data at national level just due to the pandemic. So as with any data, there's a health warning. So we don't have information on the progress that they made from their starting point. And also, as Linda highlighted this morning, attainment data is just one measure of success. However, it is important to be mindful of these figures, as we do know that outcomes and life chances in our children and young people are increased with better educational outcomes. And this is something we are striving for, to close the gaps for our care experienced young people. So this first slide shows a percentage of learners who achieve second level in numeracy and in reading at the end of primary 7. So broadly speaking, those who have achieved this will be working within the expected level for their age and stage. So next to this, we can see that the percentage of pupils who were looked after for part and or for the whole of the academic year who achieved this nationally. And you will notice that there is a gap or an attainment gap in each area, and that this is significant. I think in numeracy, there's a 34% gap, and in reading, there's a 32% gap. So those are some of the data from the end of that primary stage. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So on the next slide, it again provides us with information about the attainment gap for learners, but this time it's based on the SCQF, or the Scottish Credit and Qualifications Framework. So I'm sure some of you may be familiar with this framework, and again a link is provided at the end of these slides should you wish to look at it in more detail. For those who may not be aware, this framework uses two measures: the level of a qualification or learning programme and the number of credit points awarded, and allows us just to understand and compare various Scottish qualifications. So National 4 is the typical school SCQF Level 4 qualification. It is usually taken by learners in S4 and does not require an exam, but we would hope that the majority of learners would achieve this before leaving school. You can see that again, there is a gap between looked after learners and the national data here. The final example of data is for those achieving one or more SCQF Level 6 qualifications. So these might be a higher or a vocational qualification, an apprenticeship, or a foundation apprenticeship. It's important to note that these can be a gateway qualification for our young people. So if a child has one or more level 6 qualification, then they can get an HNC to get an HND at college and then get onto a degree level course at college or university. As you can see, the percentage of school leavers who are looked after achieving this is 12%, and there's a significant gap in comparison to all school leavers there. As mentioned previously, the raw attainment data is one measure of achievement and shouldn't be considered alone or out of context. However, it is a reminder for us all that there is work to do to support our care experienced young people to close the attainment gap, which can help lead to more positive post-school destinations and potential life outcomes. So if we go on to the next slide. So moving on from the data, I would like to offer some positive insights into promising practice emerging from the use of the care experience funding. And this is some information that I've gathered from some of the work of my colleague Janine McCulloch, who has a remit for care experience funding as a senior education officer for Education Scotland. So we would use promising rather than effective, as the fund in its use is still in the first years of delivery. In terms of the reports that we gather and look at, what we're seeing in terms of some of that positive practice are some reports measure impact well. And as attainment advisors, we work a lot with practitioners to consider how to measure the impact of any action taken to ensure that we are reflecting on whether what we do makes a difference and addresses the core needs of learners. It's clear that the virtual head teacher or virtual school approach has clear benefits for data collection, use and data linkage. Where authorities have someone with a central oversight of care experienced young people appears to be really effective in coordinating support and analysis of impact. Participation and pupil voice is being widely recognised in reporting. And pupil voice is something that is a key driver in Scottish education and will shortly be having even more prominence as we look to implement the United Nations Rights of the Child. So the Education Endowment Foundation is an educational research body, and in a report on effective approaches for closing gaps, they point out that one feature of schools that have been most successful in closing attainment gaps are those who involve families and learners in understanding their needs and coming up with approaches and solutions together. Really important. So there's evidence of more and more effective multi-agency or disciplinary working coming through in the reports. The team around the child approach is really important for supporting young people to secure the best possible outcomes. The pastoral support given by a mentor can support a young person's resilience and confidence, which in turn can help them to be in a better place to learn and improve educational outcomes. And likewise, a school sharing information with those adults offering mentoring and pastoral support can help to bridge gaps and improve relationships between the learner and the school. I think it's professionals have different knowledge and experience, and supporting each other helps the learner. So something we'd really want to encourage and see more of, and is coming through in these reports. There's evidence of greater provision of early intervention, prevention and family support. There's a much wider use of the funding happening now to support care experienced young people from 4 up to 26 years, and to include those on the edge of care. There's an increased development of mentoring programs. So some LAs are using external providers with a focus on employability, while others might be developing their own bespoke programs with a range of priorities from attainment, employability, well-being and engagement. And finally, COVID has driven creative thinking around how to provide support for individuals and families, which we hope will have legacy value going forward. The Attainment Advisors supported in a national equity audit, interviewing stakeholders from schools across Scotland, including heads, teachers, parents, learners and partners. And the deepening and appreciation for multi-agency working and partnerships was something that emerged really clearly and is something we would hope to foster and continue going forward. So perhaps that will resonate with some of you here today. So next slide, please, and my final slide. So finally, thinking about what might be useful for this particular group, my final slide of insights is around the importance of partnership working that is emphasised in the Scottish Attainment Challenge. There is an Attainment Challenge self-evaluation resource available online, and it's linked at the end of these slides. And this provides a summary of some of the most effective practice in different areas, including partnerships and family support. And I've summarised some of the key points on this slide. The importance of developing relationships, ensuring practitioners are sensitive to family needs and context, listening to and involving families and learners in solutions, strengthening extracurricular enrichment, and partners working together to strengthen homeschool links and remove barriers is key. So as a group of practitioners from different sectors, but all with a care experience remit, I just wonder how you work together to improve outcomes for young people. Are there some outcomes you're more aware of than others? For example, do you think about the connections? How does the pastoral support influence the educational attainment or attendance at school? And how well do you link up? And how well is key information shared? Is there anything that you could do differently? Sometimes incredible work is going on in different agencies for our young people in non-educational sectors that can have a big impact on educational outcomes. And we know that when our young people feel safe, cared for, have positive relationships with peers and adults, that this can increase confidence, resilience, and support them to ultimately be in the right place to learn. So that's some insights from me. And finally, I'm going to pass over to my colleague Callum, who's going to give you a practical example. So thank you.
Thank you, Eve, and good morning again, everyone. I'm going to try and give you a very honest account as an attainment advisor from my perspective, and also that of the local authority I provide support and challenge to. South Ayrshire have significantly impacted on improving outcomes for care experienced children and young people by providing equity of opportunity, raising aspirations for these pupils and their families and carers, and have provided a strong framework that supports senior leaders at both centre and establishments in progressing progress. This has been achieved by strategic thinking and key relationships from the Quality Improvement Manager, the appointed virtual head teacher, and in collaboration with the Attainment Advisor, who have helped clarify the vision, roles and responsibilities moving forward. This has included the appointment of 4 lead welfare officers who are assigned to work with those pupils who are looked after at home in the transition phase between primary 6 and S2. This is very unique, the kind of approach that South Ayrshire take in kind of targeting those pupils. The impact of this dedicated approach has allowed for the intense educational interventions that are led and advised by school staff, encouragement to participate in wider curricular activities such as sporting events and inclusive opportunities across the school and out of school clubs, promoting and improving participation has been a focus. The virtual team have also worked with these pupils to provide opportunities to partake in modern apprenticeships within their team. This has included engaging with the Children and Young People's Improvement Collaborative, which provides structure and support in driving very detailed and specific improvements for care experienced young people using the quality improvement methodology. The Principal Education Psychologist for South Ayrshire has also supported the introduction of evidence-based approaches to supporting the improvement of attainment and the wider health and well-being of the targeted group. Staff have been trained across well-being, literacy and numeracy, as well as a focus on family support and parental programmes. Attainment of looked after children has increased at SCQF level 3, 4 and 5 since 2014. I have, as an attainment advisor, ensured that relationships with the local authority have been developed are strong and they're positive, in particular with the virtual head teacher and quality improvement manager. This has made communication more accessible and enabled us to work together as a team in order to ensure that outcomes for the looked after children at home achieve the best possible outcomes. The virtual school has begun to support children and young people who are looked after away from home, whether that being a foster placement or in South Ayrshire's children's houses or with the residential placement. Support offered by the welfare officers have prevented or in many cases reduced exclusions, in some cases introduced social peer groups to others and heavily assisted in the transition in returning South Ayrshire to appropriate education and social opportunities. The virtual head teacher is absolutely committed to ensuring that collaboration with the key stakeholders is very much at the forefront of approaches that South Ayrshire take. The pupils are very much at the centre of everything South Ayrshire do in supporting care experienced pupils. The next step as a local authority and for the team is to lead work across schools to develop a coherent approach to raise awareness of these pupils and ensure that the data collected is accurate and meaningful. The data will be used to inform practice, highlighting key areas of concern, targeting specific areas of work. Data is also used to inform the team around the child meetings and looked after reviews, providing a more meaningful and accurate account of the young person. If you can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what I'm going to provide you with now is a case study, and there's many examples of case studies that South Ayrshire have undertaken, but this case study illustrates the role and impact of the virtual school welfare officer within a primary school in South Ayrshire. The aim was to work with the child's transition back into education following lockdown, the summer holidays, and a 12-week foster placement. To provide you a wee bit of context, the family placement broke down during lockdown, and as a result, there was a real strain in relationships, and the lockdown kind of exacerbated that. The welfare officer was able to utilise his relationship with the family in order to support them. The other aim was to provide support to facilitate family time with their sibling whilst they were in separate foster placements. The virtual team believed these actions would support the child's attainment and their wellbeing moving forward. The welfare officer also met with the pupil on a weekly basis. A focused piece of work was done whereby discussions were held regularly around health and wellbeing, feelings and worries, expectations and goals, with a focus on returning to education following a foster placement and within the COVID-19 climate. Very tricky, as you can imagine. Weekly sessions were held for over a period of 3 months after the pupil returned to education in order to undertake supportive therapeutic interventions. The welfare officer arranged a mutually suitable time between both the foster families for the siblings to meet up and play with each other outside in a suitable location. You can see that with some of the photographs that depict that. The welfare officer also collected the pupil, walked with them to collect their sibling, and then walked with both to a local park, as you can see again within the photos. The welfare officer also managed the COVID-19 guidelines to facilitate this family time, including wearing of masks and social distancing from others when appropriate. And obviously frequent hand sanitising. Structured coaching approaches were used to support a positive interaction between brother and sister. Clear and regular communication with social work was maintained throughout this piece of work, ensuring transparency. The welfare officer had already built a positive and trusting relationship with the children and their family, which enhanced these approaches and allowed them to have positive family contact and a natural and kind of relaxed atmosphere. The pupil returned to education successfully and engaged with education, as well as weekly sessions with the welfare officer. For a period of 3 months, in order to undertake specific pieces of work which were identified in agreement with the education and social work colleagues, data was collected over the 3 months, and this evidenced an increase in the pupil's sense of belongingness to the school, and that was achieved through the belongingness scale, perceptions of themselves as a learner and problem solver through myself as a learner scale, and improvements in their health and wellbeing using the Sterling Wellbeing Scale and Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire. and this kind of followed the work of the welfare officer. The team around the pupil noted an observable increase in the pupil's health and wellbeing from the period before the increased family time to after this period. The pupil and their siblings were also successfully returned to mum's care and residency following the 12 weeks in foster care. This is just one of numerous examples, as I've outlined already to you at the beginning, that South Ayrshire use to help demonstrate and articulate the progress they're making with health and wellbeing, achievement and attainment.
Huge thank you, Eve, Lorna and Callum. I really enjoyed hearing about the work, and the case study just brings it all to life, I think. So thank you to you and to South Ayrshire and the young person for allowing you to share that with us. For some feedback.
That's really hard to pick one point because we had such brilliant discussion. If I personally had to pick one, and apologies if the group thinks something else was more important, we had a good discussion around the attainment gap is wider than education and wider than the educational sector. For example, the widening, child poverty, and we can do as much as we can as teachers, as workers within education. But if we've got kids that are still coming in hungry or not getting what they need to thrive, we're still battling against things that are outside. And how important it is when we're talking about interagency work and in collaboration, we also need to think outside of education, because it's a huge issue. That was in a massive nutshell. I didn't do that justice, but I'm trying to be quick.
No, thank you, Rosie. I appreciate that, and I think that certainly mirrors some of the conversations we had in our group, and I know that it will have, across the other groups as well. And I think it was also Eve and Callum and Lorna touched on it as well in their presentation about not just access to the curriculum, but about those wider opportunities as well. So yeah, I think that's such an important point. So thank you very much. I will come to Leanne's group next. All right, Leanne.
Hi, we had really good discussions. Hi. It is really hard, Rosie, I think, to pick one thing, because we talked about 3 or 4 sort of different things, but just towards the end we both kind of thought, or some of us thought, this was a good idea. It was suggested. We didn't get much chance to talk about it, but someone had suggested a forum. I'm just going to find the notes. A forum within your own local authority where the focus is solely on opportunities for care experienced young people and children, and not what's going wrong for them, not what trouble that they're in, but just positive opportunities. And she talked about just trying to create great opportunities for young people and what have they actually experienced that's been success. So an example was like maybe Outward Bound, or involvement like with animals or pets or something like that, just looking at that rather than sometimes dwelling on the negatives. I know when you go to meetings it can be like that.
Thank you, Julie, and I think that's so crucial, and I think all of us here, given that the roles we're in and the work that we do, know how important it is to focus on success, recognising success and looking for opportunities. But I know that we also know how difficult that can be as well in the day-to-day when things are really busy. So to have those kind of sharing opportunities is really important. I know that when we have the forum meetings and it gives us a bit of a chance to talk about practice and what's going on, it certainly gives me ideas and helps me make new connections. So to have that, if it was specific to your local authority and the children and young people that you were working with, I'm sure there would be lots of rich information that came out of it. So if it is something that anybody decides to look into a wee bit further, please let us know how it goes, or if it's something that you've already got going on in your local authorities, please feel free to reach out and share information and learning from each other as well. So thank you very much for that, Julie. I'll go to Eve's group now.
Thank you, Linda. So we again had loads of really interesting discussion, and what a privilege it was for me, I was saying to the group, to be amongst so many different professionals from different places at once talking about young people, because I just don't think that happens enough. But it was fabulous, not for me anyway, so it's great. But one thing that really stuck out for me was there's a comment made about, you know, we talk a lot about outputs of our young people, but the question was, what are the input gaps for them? You know, what are the actual input gaps for the individuals? Because we get very het up on outputs a lot of the time. And to sort of link in with that, somebody added in about, you know, yeah, it's about changing, sometimes thinking about changing the pot and not the flower, you know, of our young people. And in terms of, you know, there's no hard to reach learners, just hard to reach services. So some real, I do like a metaphor. So there were some really good ones and good images in that group, but really thought provoking for me. And I think that is true. What are the input gaps? What is it about relationships, about soft, you know, the softer skills, but very, very important social capital, cultural capital? How do we enhance those for our young people? Often those are the conditions that then lead to success, and it's that conditions that we can really help with in terms of input. So that was a good point, I thought. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that, Eve. And yeah, I think that's something for us all to hold in mind. And I know that we all talk and we've all faced the challenge of, you know, how do we maybe measure some of the, you know, those inputs that we talk about, and, you know, how do we measure impact and know that we're doing is making a difference. I think even just thinking about the case study that Callum shared, you know, taking us through that young person's story and understanding the story that young person and family have been on, really helps us to think about what inputs I feel like have been important, have been really meaningful to children as well. And I think while data is, you know, absolutely important, we need to know how we're doing, we need to be able to measure it, but I think also telling stories and sharing those about how children are getting on is really important as well. And that's, I think, what your group was talking about, Eve, all part of the understanding what the ingredients are that goes into that storytelling. Thank you. Michael, will I come to your group next?
We had a really good discussion as well in our group, and I think the one central thing that we wanted to give over was this idea of the importance of the relationships in the network, that none of the rest of it doesn't work without that, and how complex that can be, maintaining those relationships as the key framework on which everything else works. I think that was it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks to Amanda, if you can hear us, for willing to do the feedback as well. I think that's spot on. I know that everybody in this room will know the power of connection and having, you know, when multi-agency relationships are working well, how impactful that can be for children and families. But we also know the graft that it can sometimes take to build and sustain them as well. And I think it's important to hold in mind that that is a really meaningful part of our work, is building and maintaining those relationships, and those networks working are key to supporting children. So thank you very much for that piece of feedback. And last but certainly not least is the group that I was in. So I will pass over to Callum.
Thanks, Linda. You're killing me here to try and get 1 point from our group, because it was like we're rabbits. Okay, so I'm going to touch on the point of leadership. And it was mentioned in our group about potential silo working happening across various organisations, even within organisations themselves. So one of the points you kind of mentioned was about that we talk about equity of opportunity for pupils and children and young people, but what about equity of opportunity? For example, one of the ladies on the call mentioned that they have not been given the privilege to be part of a forum because they're in the volunteering sector. So for me, that was raising questions about that equity of opportunity out there in the system, as well as for pupils. But what I came back to was about that kind of leadership. I think in order to bring all this together, it's important that we do have very clear and cohesive leadership, that there's a sense of that across the board. We're clear on the vision, what we want. We spoke about policy and systems within that as well, how we kind of bring that into kind of play. And I kind of mentioned the collective efficacy in terms of we need to be all kind of marching along at the right kind of pace at the right time, and know our learners, going back to those kind of relationships. So honestly, there was so much I could have mentioned there, but thanks for having the privilege to work with you guys at Celsius and also the group that I was involved in today. So thanks.
Brilliant, Callum. Thank you very much. And I'm looking at the notes that I've jotted down, just while people have been giving feedback, and it's just so diverse. And I think we could have spent a full day in those rooms talking about those 3 questions, which I think speaks to some of the power of getting this group together. I think just that collective insight and wisdom and willingness to always be open and share information. I am gutted that we've only got 5 minutes left and we've not got time for a wider discussion. Like I say, I'm sure we could genuinely continue to talk about this all day. Just to do a very quick wrap up. Like I said, we will share the materials that we've collected from today on our Celsius website. We'll also send out an e-newsletter to let you know when that's gone live. If there's any questions that I've not seen or managed to get to in the chat, we will also try and mop them up and get back to people afterwards as well. I just wanted to flag for people that the Fostering Network's Young Advocates Project has been working on an e-module for a resource for educators in Scotland that they are launching next Tuesday. The information is on their website if people would like to go along to the launch of that module. The young people will be taking people through it and showing people how to use it. But then the module will also be available on their website after it. So we make sure that there's a link to that in there as well. Can I say a huge thank you to Eve, Callum and Lorna for coming along today, for the time that they've taken to put the presentation together, to present, to facilitate, and also just to acknowledge Jamie as well, who I know supported the development of the presentation as well. So please pass on our thanks to him. And we do really appreciate your time and hope that we can continue to collaborate in the future. And hear more about the work that's going on with the Attainment Challenge and what the Attainment Advisors are doing. A big thanks as well to our Celsius team, our facilitators, our great team that are behind the scenes, Michelle and Eileen and Emma, making sure that we're all in the places that we're supposed to be when we're supposed to be there. And finally, a huge thank you to all of you for coming along today, not just taking the time, but also, as ever, sharing with such openness and honesty, and coming along and engaging in these types of conversations. We really appreciate it, and we value your feedback. I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody and hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.